The Greek army vanished overnight. The beach was empty. The war was over. And then someone spotted it. A wooden horse, enormous, standing alone on the sand where 50,000 soldiers had been camped the night before. Inside the city walls, two people said, "Do not bring it in." One was a priest. One was a princess. Nobody listened to either of them. By morning, Troy was gone. The man who built the horse was named Odysseus, and he had been trying to go home for 10 years. That detail matters more than it is usually given credit for. Odysseus had not come to Troy because he wanted to. He had come because of an oath, a political arrangement made years before the war, when a Spartan king named Menelaus married the most beautiful woman in Greece and made every eligible man in the country swear to defend that marriage if it was ever threatened. When a Trojan prince named Paris sailed to Sparta, accepted Menelaus' hospitality, and left with his wife Helen, the oath came due. Every man who had signed it was obligated to fight. Odysseus had tried to escape the obligation by pretending to be insane, plowing his fields with salt, behaving as a man who could not be trusted with a spear. The recruiters placed his infant son in the path of his plow. He turned aside to avoid the child. The sanity was immediately obvious. He went to Troy. For 10 years, he watched the war refuse to end. The walls of Troy held. Every Greek attempt to take the city by force failed. Achilles, the greatest warrior alive, fought and killed and died, and the wall still stood. Menelaus, whose wife this war was being fought to recover, could not reclaim her. 50,000 men, the best of Greece, camped on a foreign beach for a decade. And Troy, a city of perhaps 50,000 people, would not fall. By the 10th year, Odysseus understood something that the other Greek commanders had not yet accepted. The war could not be won by force. Troy would have to be made to defeat itself. The idea of the horse came from Odysseus, not the wood, not the scale, not the offering, the psychology. The Greeks needed Troy to do something no city under siege had ever done: open its own gates. And to make a city open its gates, you had to give it a reason to want to. You had to give it the story it needed. Odysseus understood, after 10 years of watching the Trojans hold on, exactly what story that was. The war is over. You held. You won. The gods have turned in your favor. Come out from behind your walls. The war is done. The horse was the prop. Sinon was the actor. Sinon was a Greek soldier, chosen by Odysseus for his ability to lie convincingly under pressure, which is a specific and uncommon skill. His role was to be found near the horse, to appear abandoned and frightened, and to tell the Trojans exactly what Odysseus needed them to hear: that the horse was an offering to Athena, that it had been built large deliberately so Troy could not take it inside, that if they managed to bring it through their gates anyway, the goddess's protection would transfer to them. The story was engineered to make the horse irresistible. Every element of Sinon's lie was designed not to deceive the Trojan mind, but to speak directly to the Trojan heart. Exhausted, hopeful, desperate for a reason to believe the suffering had finally produced something. Inside the horse, folded into the timber darkness, were the men Odysseus had chosen. Among them, Menelaus himself, the king whose stolen wife had started all of this, now crouched in silence in a wooden horse, waiting for his chance to walk through a gate that 10 years of war had failed to open. Diomedes, who had once wounded the god Ares in battle. Neoptolemus, son of Achilles, fighting in his dead father's name. And Odysseus, the architect of the plan, who had to trust that Sinon would hold his story, that the Trojans would take the bait, and that the Greek fleet hidden behind the nearby island of Tenedos would see the signal fire in time to return. Inside that horse, Odysseus waited, and the Trojans debated. The first warning came from a priest named Laocoon. He was not a soldier, not a strategist, just a man of the gods with enough clarity to see what his city wanted to be true and resist it. He stood before the assembled Trojans, before the king Priam and his council, and said the words that have survived 3,000 years. "I fear the Greeks even when they bring gifts." He took a spear and hurled it at the horse's flank. Inside the timber, the Greek soldiers felt the impact. The wood rang hollow, the unmistakable sound of an enclosed space, of something hidden. The crowd heard it. Before Laocoon could press further, 2 enormous sea serpents rose from the water and killed Laocoon and both his sons before the crowd's eyes. Troy interpreted this as divine punishment for his impiety. The priest who told the truth was killed for it. Inside the horse, in the dark, Odysseus heard the crowd's interpretation shift. The priest's death had become confirmation of the horse's sanctity. The plan was working. The second warning was Cassandra. She was a daughter of Priam, the king's own child, who had been given the gift of true prophecy by Apollo and then cursed, when she refused him, never to be believed. She had lived her entire life knowing exactly what would happen and watching people choose not to hear it. She came to the square and told them, not in riddles, not in vague divine language. She told them precisely what was inside the horse and precisely what would follow if it entered the gates. She had been right about everything for years. She was dismissed as she had always been dismissed. Priam, her father, the king who had held this city for 10 years through force of will and love for his people, chose not to listen to his daughter. He ordered the gates widen. They had to widen the gates. The horse was too large to fit through. Troy, a city whose walls had never been breached in 10 years of war, dismantled part of its own fortifications to bring a Greek weapon inside. Odysseus heard the gate open, heard the sound of timber on stone as the horse was dragged through, heard the celebration begin outside, the voices of a city that had not known peace in a decade and was drinking it now in one enormous, exhausted, relieved night. He waited. The celebration went on for hours. He waited for it to go quiet. He waited for the silence of a city that had finally, completely let its guard down. Before dawn, Sinon crept to the horse and gave the signal. Odysseus opened the trap door. One by one, the soldiers dropped to the ground inside the walls of Troy. They moved through the darkened streets to the gates. They opened them from the inside. On the shore, the Greek fleet that had been hiding at Tenedos saw the signal fire and turned back toward Troy. 50,000 soldiers walked through gates that 10 years of siege had never opened. Troy burned. Priam was killed. Menelaus found Helen. The war that had lasted a decade ended in a single night. And Odysseus, who had planned it, who had folded himself into darkness and waited for the right moment, who had spent 10 years thinking about nothing but getting home, turned and looked at the burning city, and then got into a boat. It would take him 10 more years to reach Ithaca. The war he had not wanted to fight was finally over. The journey he had not expected would now begin. But standing on the beach at Troy, watching the fire he had started consume the city whose walls had held for a decade, Odysseus had one thing he had not had in years. He had a direction.